Welcome to NewsNale episode 28 here this Wednesday, March 27th, 2024. Today's NewsNale is going to be focused on crisis management. Why crisis management? Well, if you saw in the news recently, the head of Boeing, the CEO, is going to step down at the end of this year after another poorly handled crisis at Boeing. So I thought that'd be a pretty interesting one to talk about. Boeing, the classic case of how not to handle a crisis. We'll talk about a couple other examples and the gold standard of how to handle a crisis. But first, NewsNale is brought to you by NailsEd, a learning and development platform focused on professional communications. You can improve your communications in writing, in presentations, and managing meetings, which will make you a more effective member of your team or your organization. We can work with individuals, with your team, with your whole organization. You can find out more at nailsed.com. And we'll be back to office hours next Wednesday, April 3rd. Sorry, I've been out, been handling some emergencies down here in Florida with my dad, but we'll be able to do office hours next April 3rd. Unfortunately, I will still be down here, so we will have to do it Zoom. We have two different times for this set of office hours. One is 6 to 8 a.m. Mountain, and the other is 2 to 4 p.m. Mountain, all via Zoom. You can RSVP at nailsed.com or wait till you get an email from me to RSVP and pick a specific time slot between those two times, 30-minute increments. Looking forward to chatting with you again. Missed everybody while I was running around doing this, and really looking forward to getting back to it. So let's get back to the pod, right? Crisis management. So you're going to hit a crisis at some point in your career, either as a part of your team or a project you're working on, or if you're running an organization, or if you run into a problem on a job you're working on, or you have a client. It's not even a crisis, maybe a problem. There are ways to handle this that actually strengthen the relationship with whomever the crisis happened, and in the case of companies, it's with the general public. For you, it could be with your boss, it could be with the client, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So when a crisis happens, when something goes wrong, there are 3 steps to take that help you meet this crisis head on and get through it the best way possible. The first is the top person must respond immediately. So in the case of a company, it's the CEO, the chairman, the president. If it's your team, it's whoever running the team. If you're working with a client, it's the top representative of the organization. It could be you, but you have to respond. You have to proactively respond. Don't wait for someone to call you out on it. Don't wait for the New York Times to publish an article. Don't wait for the FAA to ground your jets. You have to respond and acknowledge the issue. Step 2 is acknowledge the issue. It doesn't always mean taking full responsibility, but it's okay, even if it's not your fault, to take responsibility, because the public is going to force you. It's going to look like it's your responsibility anyway. So you might as well be proactive and take responsibility. And step 3 is to overcorrect. Why overcorrect? Kind of like when you're going for funding in a startup, you ask for too much money because you don't want to go in and do this again, right? You don't want to undercorrect because then you've got to go through these 3 steps again, saying, oops, we didn't correct enough, we made a mistake, acknowledge the issue, and then you got to overcorrect again. So you might as well overcorrect at the start. You can always dial it back down, but always go in with overcorrect. The public will appreciate it, your management will appreciate it, your stock will appreciate it. It sounds crazy and it's a little bit more expensive and a little more time consuming, but it is the right way to do it. So we're going to talk about a few examples of how to do this. 2 are the wrong way. So one is Peloton with their Tread Plus treadmill. The other is Boeing with the Max Jet situations, both 4 years ago and today. And then the gold standard of crisis management to this day happened in 1982 at J&J with the Tylenol poisonings. We'll get to all 3 of them. So let's talk about Peloton. So Peloton, back in January of 2021, a child was pulled under one of their Tread Plus treadmills. Peloton did nothing. It was written up in papers. Of course, parents are the worst people to piss off, and they were upset. And then 4 months later, a child died from the same treadmill. Okay, so here's the deal. Probably not the treadmill's fault. Treadmills are dangerous. My son skinned all the skin off his elbow playing on a neighbor's treadmill. We had to go to the ER and sew it up. They can put all the safety precautions, but if parents aren't doing their job, someone's going to get on it and they're going to get pinned underneath it, and it's not good. So, hey, Peloton probably thought, not my pig, not my farm, but it is. It is your pig. It's your treadmill, right? And there was no comment from Peloton leadership after the child died. And the press and the stories are starting to run, and it looked bad. No one stepped forward. So finally, in May, a month later, they finally said, okay. When it was overwhelming and everyone knew they were forced to do it, they recalled all their Tread Plus treadmills. It cost them $165,000. On top of that, they got $165 million. And on top of that, they got a $19 million fine from the government. So this now cost them $185 million. And they probably didn't do much to the treadmill because, again, not much to do. Maybe it was another safety precaution, but at least they built awareness that, hey, don't have your kids play on these things, right? So the stock took a hit. It really never climbed back. And then we know the rest of the story because it's bad leadership at Peloton. They thought the COVID days were every days, and built up inventory that everyone was going to stay home on their Peloton once COVID ended instead of going out and being with the public. Anyway, so that was Peloton's way of badly handling a crisis. Let's talk a little bit about Boeing. Okay, we have to back up to 2018. In October, there was the first crash of the 737 MAX in Indonesia, killing all 189 people on board, right? Boeing didn't do anything, okay? A couple weeks later, FAA and Boeing said, we're evaluating the situation. Not good. Still didn't do anything. And then in 2019, okay, like 4 or 5 months later, in March of 2019, another crash happened from a 737 MAX, killing all 157 people on board. And again, in March, 2 days later, Boeing still hadn't said anything. So the FAA did something. They mandated that that they ground the 737 MAX jets. Think how different it would have been had Boeing stepped forward and said, we are grounding these planes until we figure this out. But they didn't, okay? Then 4 months later, in June, finally, Boeing executives, different ones, take turns apologizing. It wasn't the top person. It was a different person every time. The end of July, they post the largest quarterly loss ever. Shocker. And then in October of 2019, they fired this Kevin McAllister, who was the top executive for its commercial airplanes divisions. Still, to this point, no one has stepped forward. No one has assumed responsibility. No one has overcorrected. No one has done anything from Boeing. So then in December of 2019, they fired the chief executive, David Muhlenberg, and appointed David Calhoun. Again, still no one has come forward. And what they did find out was after their analysis, in a cost-saving move, they had outsourced certain pieces of the software in the autopilot, saving a whopping $10,000, and that was the issue with the 737 MAX. So December, Calhoun takes over, and then Boeing continues to make poor decisions, really poor leadership here at this organization. And I'm super sorry because a lot of our great Montana State University engineering graduates go work there, but the leadership there is really not good. Let me keep going through this timeline, and you'll probably agree with me. In April of 2020, they laid off tens of thousands of workers because of COVID, right? So and this is a huge mistake that the entire airline industry made. And it, again, like Peloton, thinking the COVID days were going to be every days. So another cost-cutting move. They laid off all these people, and shocker, COVID ended, and shocker, people needed planes, people needed to fly, and you can't just get people back in. So another cost-focused move they did was they moved its production of the 787 Dreamliners to a non-union facility in North Charleston. Again, only thinking about cost cutting, and they did it again. Again, out of their unionized plant, and then they had 100 of engineers retiring in 2022, not forced retirement, but they offered them early retirement, again, because of COVID, another cost-cutting move. And so now Boeing and the suppliers have struggled to hire back its workers, right? And it complicated their efforts of ramping up production of the MAX jets. And they're at odds with their union because they lost 30,000 Seattle mechanic jobs as they were negotiating a new contract. So then in January of 2021, the government reached a $2.5 billion deal with the company that they would pay this fine and the company would avoid prosecution for the over 300 deaths that they caused of their plane. And now the government is actually reviewing that to see whether actually Boeing complied with the terms of that deal and more stringent safety requirements, because it sounds like they didn't because of what happened recently with the door flying off. But let's keep walking through this timeline. So April of 2021, they had to ground the MAX jets again because of some bolts that were loose. Shocker, sound familiar? Loose bolts. And so that grounded the jets in April of 2021. Again, in December of 2023, there were other concerns brought by pilots about this MAX jet, and that the problems continued until January of 2024, when the door panel flew off the Alaska Air flights. And then 3 months later, Boeing and their supplier failed safety audits. And again, Boeing still hasn't taken real responsibility for the doors flying off. And now we have Calhoun announcing he will step down at the end of the year, along with the chair of the board and the president of their commercial airline group. So not good work for Boeing. And so now let's move on to the folks at Tylenol, right? How to successfully meet a crisis. So back in J&J, folks, back in 1982, Tylenol was one of the first over-the-counter aspirin substitutes. There were 100 million people that bought the product. They had a 35% market share. 35%. I mean, there's no product that I can think of besides Google search that has over like 10. 35% market share. It accounted for 19% of all of J&J's profits. So this is a lot, right? And what happened in I think it was April of 1982, some whack job took some Tylenol off the shelf, and back then you didn't have tamper-proof packaging, so you could just screw open the top, and in the capsules, they replaced them with capsules full of cyanide, and it killed 7 people in a week. And so so what happened? So what did J&J do? James Burke, the president, the chairman at the time, said, this is horrible, stepped forward, senior person stepped forward immediately, took full responsibility of the situation and overcorrected. They pulled all the products off the shelves nationwide. It was $100 million worth of product. They offered refunds to anyone that had Tylenol in their cupboards, asked them to throw it out. Again, not their fault. They didn't put cyanide in there. It happened after it left the plant, but they said, we will do this until it's safe. And then they worked with the FDA to develop the first ever and now industry standard tamper-proof packaging, and that's the plastic on the outside and the foil across the top. That never happened before. And then they retooled all their plants to make this packaging, and they did this all within 2 months and got the packaging, they got the product back out, got right back to their 35 share, and people loved J&J, trusted J&J. And so why did they do this? So James Burke was asked about this because He's been cited as like one of the top 25 CEOs in the history um, of of management, and he said, "Well, it was easy to do. We have a credo, and the credo is." We believe our first responsibility is to the doctors, nurses, and patients, and to mothers and fathers, and all others who use our products and services. This was their credo. This is what he took to the board and said, we have to pull this packaging off. And there were no arguments from the board. And this was an expensive venture to do. And he said it was an easy decision based on who we are and what we represent. And he has since gotten the Presidential Medal of Honor. But he was quoted as saying, he said, trust is everything in relationships and with people, but it's certainly true with organizations. And the trust factor with J&J at that point was the highest it's ever been. They've since mishandled other Tylenol crises. I think like 4 years ago they had an issue and they tried to quietly take it off the shelves, which kind of backfired. So anyway, this Tylenol crisis, even to this day, is the standard by which crisis management is judged today, and that's a long time later. But that's how you do it. You have the 3 steps that you should be doing. Senior person steps forward, acknowledge the situation, and overcorrect. And how does that happen for you personally? It was a great line I think a boss told me. He said, if a problem happens that you're working on, or I worked in client service business, or something happens with a client, as long as you don't tell anybody, it's your problem. But the minute you share it, it's our problem. So I would recommend, if something's going wrong, think of some solutions. Go to your boss, enroll them into the situation, but do it right away. And don't just come, oh, I have a problem, right? So here's some things I've thought of as some potential solutions. There was a study done once when I was running my agency about how to build great loyalty with your agency. And it was basically said that the strongest relationships with agencies were developed after a situation happened based on how the agency reacted to that problem. Because remember, it's not if something's going to go wrong, it's when something's going to go wrong. And I would always, at our agency, if there was a problem, I would instantly call the client, whether it was missing a deadline or getting something launched on time. I would acknowledge the situation, I would take responsibility, and we would overcorrect. And our clients, because of that, loved us. So just remember that as you go forward. And that kind of wraps up this NewsNale. And I hope you have a great rest of the week. And I look forward to seeing everybody at office hours again. And thanks for listening. And remember, as I like to say, we're live. You're live. This is no dress rehearsal. So you know what? Live every day and enjoy it. Great. We'll talk to you later.